Hello, this is Dr. Garrett Castleberry, Program Director for Communication, Media, and Ethics here at Mid-America Christian University. I am here with our final mini lecture for Week 5 of Media Culture and Social Influence. And once again, we're going to piggyback off of some of our student discussion questions as a way to wrap up the semester, talk about some final ideas, and maybe even leave some cliffhangers that you all, the audience, can pick up on at a later point, whether independently or perhaps even in another class here with us. All right, so I'm looking at some of the Week 4 discussion questions, and we just seem to be getting stronger and more confident each week, and want to pick up on a few of these. Don't have time for very many, but we're going to do what we can right here at the Rat Race at the end of our fast track semester. So I'm looking at Megan's discussion prompts for Week 4, and a little bit of a thought she's teasing out, a long thought. I'll abbreviate it and sort of offer some commentary where I feel like a question presents itself. And so she starts with by saying, Berger mentions culture shock at the beginning of chapter 4 while discussing cultural codes. In that same vein, I am thinking of how much experiencing other cultural codes and culture shock has changed me as an American born and raised in central Oklahoma in an almost entirely white Christian community. And so Megan goes on to build a very descriptive context for this, which is very thought-provoking. She needs her own YouTube channel, right, to kind of elucidate on these ideas. But she closes by noting it definitely makes studying these experiences, right, diverse and unique experiences she's had, definitely makes studying cultural codes and more enriching, in my opinion. And I think most Americans would benefit being pushed into culture shock at least once. To which I would respond, yes, it is important practice. Culture shock doesn't have to be a negative experience. It can, it is jarring, but so many of the things we experience for the first time can be. And so one of the things cultural experiences outside of the norm or outside of our spheres of influence, our personal relationships or our comfort zone, this helps broaden our sensibility. It helps add to our world perspective. And so it allows us to then empathize with others as well. Last week we talked about, or maybe 2 weeks ago, stereotyping and the danger of over-relying on stereotypes to inform our worldview, because that can lead to what we call ethnocentrism or ethnocentric behavior. And so yes, culture shock can be a good thing in that it helps condition us to recognize the world is larger than perhaps we often take for granted. Very good. Okay, so let me jump on. We don't have a lot of time for this session, and so I want to make sure I can get to as many of our folks as possible. William just kind of knocked it out of the park with a lot of food for thought this week. William brings a bunch of questions here, and so one of the questions William asks is, how has video games affected our youth in a negative way? Right? It's like, video games? What? Negative? And indeed, I think many people can and do. We can make a case for the types of positives that video games can add. Community, just activities that stimulate our mind. Some of the more complex games can push us to keep track of and clock and learn to, work through and process very multi-dimensional storylines or story threads or types of narrative like that, and so they can be challenging in that way. And then there's always that case to make for the interaction you get if you're gaming online, or perhaps even something like the Wii that can function as a family activity. So there are those cases to be made. and so in terms of why is it we can't convincingly make the case of video games having a negative impact is what we call in statistics that problem of correlation, right? Of they can make a case for video games meeting both positive and negative aspects of who we are, or like what we call effects or media effects. And so, I think it depends on the situation and circumstances. And I'm sure, if we had like a bunch of gamers in the room, they would advocate for gaming. And if we had a bunch of worried, not to classify it too narrowly, but say like a lot of maybe traditional moms, maybe there'd be more concern, right? So you're gonna find a little bit of a mixed response there. However, recently I just had a conversation with a relative, and the relative is a gamer, an advocate, right? A big time player since a young age, and as through that growing up process, relative was expressing how they came to a place of feeling like they were investing so much time and energy into gaming or video games or that sort of thing, but came to a point of recognizing they weren't necessarily getting anything back from it. Whether it's they're not getting anything back from it anymore, or that process, the requirement, the time requirement, the amount of investment just wasn't paying off, and maybe in like real world terms. So there is something to that, right? And we have to be cautious. So William also asks, why do you think most people imprint the meaning of their lives by age 7? So just to clarify, Berger brings the stat up, and several of our texts do. It's not just researchers, but those that study, children and cognition. There is a threshold, particularly between that age of 3 and 7. They're highly impressionable phases, and that 0 to 3 range, we're developing a lot of our brain capacity. Right, we're processing things for the first time. We're learning how to think, but even prior to 7, we a lot of our actions, our understandings, the way we read the world is hypersensitive, right, on an emotional level. And so many of the things we come into contact at a young age can have that emotional impact on us, right? And it would take a lot more effort to bring in the hard science on that. But if you're in a future class, we're going to look at some videos on that upcoming. Possibly check out our digital media literacy, or even we might tackle a little bit of that in our computer-mediated communication class as well. So the short answer is because we are at peak emotional development in that 7 and lower age range, and so we really have to be conscientious of what we want to expose young children to. I mean, they are impressionable, and that has long-term consequences. All right, so there's some great questions about Jung versus Freud versus these sort of these psychologists, and that's a lot to unpack, and so we might have to table it for that longer inquiry, maybe even a heart-to-heart in person on that front. But great questions coming out from our folks. This question asks, let's see here, does Berger suggest we are without personality when we are not dealing with others in social situations? Are we without personality, right? I think there's that sense of sometimes these theorists want to challenge the way we think about not only the world but ourselves, and I think what ultimately Berger, and he's drawing from others, is getting at is that much of our personality is what we call learned behavior, right? We take on certain personality traits. I say traits implies inherited, but we take on certain personality avenues based on our surroundings in the world, right? So there's that combination of the things we might genetically inherit, but there are a great many details having to do with the shaping of our personality that are shaped by the world around us, right? The things we interact with and so on. I mean, someone that grows up in an orphanage is going to have, their worldview is going to be shaped, their personality is going to be shaped differently than, someone that grows up in, I don't know, a house with, as an only child, right, in a house where they're maybe very, very sheltered, taken care of, and so on, right? Just like we have personalities that reflect the times in which we grow up in, right? I mean, you think about, who your grandparents are versus your parents versus yourself, versus your children, and so on. So our surroundings do shape our personality. There was a follow-up out of the question 2, was we... psychoanalyst has a theory that we are all imposters and don't really know who we are. Do you agree with this assertion? Well, there's that old adage, fake it till you make it. So, are we imposters, right? And what does that mean? What does it mean? Who are you? And we don't have time for a long drawn out pause of silence here, but Irving Goffman wrote a very well cited book, coming out of some scholarly inquiry into this idea of our performances of everyday life. And so, the base point here is that we have what he would theorize, and many follow in that lineage of shared belief. We have many selves, right? Not many selves, right? Like little me, mini me, but many selves that we communicate to the world. And so, that's just like who you communicate as yourself at home looks a little bit different from maybe who you communicate yourself to be at work versus at school, right? And so we have these different kinds of personality traits that sort of rise to the surface or maybe like regress a little bit, depending on our circumstances. And so that's a little bit of food for thought, right? So, but an imposter is a way of shuffling the deck to get us thinking about that. Okay, let me blast through some more here. We're almost out of time. Okay, let's see. Ashley has some amazing questions this week. Thank you so much. Does social media make it easier or harder for people to conceal their identity? Exactly. Right? Ask yourself, what are you trying to conceal versus what are you trying to reveal on social media? And I think if we just look even at our own projections of self and the way we frame ourselves, right? Remember, the way we're framing our reality online, we're able to find that answer for ourselves. So it may even be an individualistic response for so many of us. Let's see, web searches such as Google and Yahoo, they're so plentiful. Do you feel that libraries will be a thing of the past? Well, while we may have some structures that carry on into the future, they have already diminished in terms of their social and their cultural value. And we can say that, right? So, it's hard to stop progress, even if progress feels like, negative momentum or something. Okay. One more. Do game makers have a duty, Call of Duty, to consider the psychological effects of their games on adolescents? Well, the ultimate truth is that they're not in the business of ethics. They're in the business of economics. And so as long as that bottom line controls the margins, that's where they will make their decisions. All right, and finally, Destiny asks, in our book messages, Berger states, people lower down the socioeconomic ladder usually like their steaks well done, and people up the ladder tend to like them rare. What do you think Berger's trying to get at? We're all creatures of habit. He's getting at that we are naturally organizing we are highly ritualistic, and we are moved by storytelling. I'm going to let you think on that. It's been a great course with you all. Good luck.